There has never been a time in my life when I've heard that speech that tears don't fill my eyes and sometimes spill down. I just can't do it. There's so much that I don't want to say. I want to give you all time and opportunity to express your thoughts and to have a kind of a time to share together about this. Before you had arrived, I was telling the folks here that one of the programs that we'll be doing in the future is a musical program which shows the connection between 1863 and 1963. I couldn't help but be reminded of that throughout this whole presentation, because most of the songs that they sang were songs from 1863. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Hold On. Those are all songs that I call slave songs, whose roots are in even much in the 1820s and 30s and 40s. That they still resonated in 1963 and spoke so powerfully to us then. Frankly, they still speak powerfully to me today. Shows that connection between that 100-year span of time. We have come, indeed, so incredibly far. Things have happened in this nation that I certainly thought that I would never see in my lifetime. Well, Barack Obama, for one. I've always been hopeful that, and I still am hopeful, that politics aside, whether you're a Republican or whatever your views are, that people can understand what a meaningful thing that was to elect Barack Obama as president of this nation. One of the things that I was so incredibly proud and so very struck by about his campaign and his winning that first presidency, that first term in office, was that while he was a black man, he was first an American. And he never made his election about his race. I thought that was not only appropriate, but brilliant, and it spoke volumes about America and this nation. We certainly have our foibles. I think all you have to do is look around you today and watch the politics that's going on. We have our warts. But what an incredible spirit we have to overcome that which is incredibly difficult. There are times when I am really pessimistic and very worried about issues like poverty and race in America, gender equality. You could kind of name the issues. I get concerned about how we're dealing with those things presently. Well, a lot of that has to do with the fact that, maybe I would indict many, but black American leaders, parents, all of us, because we have unfortunately failed to educate and to share these stories and to train our youth and our children where we have come, what we came from, and what sacrifices have been made. I was fortunate in that I lived during that cusp time, that time between the 50s and the transition of the 60s and what came after. I spent a lot of time in the inner city, Syracuse, Utica, places like that, and I'm amazed at the lack of understanding and the lack of cultural memory that's taking place in generations that came after me about what it was like and where we've come from. I'm going to stop myself from talking.
You're doing fine.
Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is? Boy. I think to a certain degree, some of us have become complacent, and maybe there is a tendency not to want to talk about that which was painful and that which was difficult. Well, that's over now. We don't need to really discuss it. But if you don't know where you came from, you're apt to slip back into the same kinds of problems. And one of the big factors for me is, if I'm 14 years old, I'm 15, I'm 16, and I see this, and I see what sacrifices were made on the streets of Alabama and Mississippi and these places to get voting rights and the right to work in the workplace with, and a right to a job and not to be segregated based upon race or religion and those kinds of things. To me, you can't look at that and not be proud. You can't look at that and not have it affect who you are, because now you understand from whence you came and what dignity and what sacrifice it took to bring us to here. Without that, you have no anchor in the past. And that I find somewhat disturbing, because I see a lot of young people who have no self-esteem. So it's very easy to get caught up in the pleasures of the moment. Who's got the best sneakers? Where do I get the next high? Whatever it might be. And I think the best defense against that is to have a good sense of self and who we are as a nation, who Black Americans are as a people. Not the artificial stuff that might be commercial, not the message that the hip-hoppers and the rappers are putting out there, but the true history. Anyway, that's my view on that. I want to share one other thing with you. There was a lot of talk in this movie about the Emancipation Proclamation. I don't know if you're aware, but there is an original copy of the Emancipation Proclamation at the New York State Museum in Albany, complete with Abraham Lincoln's handwriting and notations in the margins. That was donated to the state of New York and the New York State Museum by Garrett Smith of Peterborough, New York.
Is that the one that was in Syracuse?
Yes.
Okay.
And we have a copy of that in Peterborough for people to view. Garrett was one of the wealthiest men in America, and he used his wealth to great purpose. He felt that it was his responsibility, I'm kind of going afield here, but he felt that it was his responsibility to use that great wealth for the betterment of mankind. After the Civil War, there were a great many Civil War veterans who were without jobs, who had been harmed by the war. They had post-traumatic stress syndrome in those days too. They just didn't know how to label it. A lot of them suffered from that and from other debilitating injuries. So they held a lottery to raise money for the veterans. And what they were putting up in this lottery was a signed original copy of the Emancipation Proclamation. And Garrett Smith won the lottery because he bought all the tickets.
What was his education background?
He graduated from Hamilton. Yeah. But back to the march. So, any other observations, feelings?
How are people?
Some of those slave songs that were written in the 19th century became blues songs.
Well, blues music,
Yeah.
Jeff, kind of grew out of those slave songs, if you will.
That's what I was trying to state.
As did jazz,
Yeah.
even to a certain degree rock and roll. Those same themes, those same tones and overtones exist there.
So that's what I was trying to state.
Yeah. Let's segue to that too, because most of the slave songs, we know them as spirituals. I like to call them slave songs. They are all based on a pentatonic scale. That pentatonic scale can be played on the black notes of a piano. You can play the melody of every spiritual on just the black sharp keys. Okay? However, to really complete the beauty of that music and the richness of those melodies, you got to play the white keys too. There's
Wow.
a message there.
There's a song, Ebony and Ivory, that refers to that, I believe.
Other impressions about the march?
Yeah, I have a question. A little bit off the topic, but somewhat still on it. In the North, was there segregation like there was in the South, and also slavery back in the 1800s, and slave holders in the North like they did in the South?
Yes, there were slaves were held all through America. The North, but state by state, ended slavery long before the South did, but we were all bound up in this. It's a real fallacy that the North was largely anti-slavery. The fact was that the value of slaves, how do I put this well? We basically were the gross national product of the United States. The value of slaves significantly dwarfed, by comparison, all of the other industries in America combined, which is why it was such a contentious issue. Where they thought we're gonna impoverish this nation if we free these people. And there was a direct connection between the South and the North. The South raised the cotton. The mills were in Utica and Albany and all across the Northeast. So to suggest that there was not collusion and that there was not a connection there is just not true. I'm forgetting the second half of your question.
Okay, and I've always, when I've seen a movie about it, they always show it in the South, the segregation and the
Yeah.
slavery.
Oh, segregation. Yes, there was meaningful segregation in the South. I heard my father talk about it many times. It was part of the lore that I heard and listened to. When you grew up in Peterborough, New York, if you wanted to go out for a fish dinner on a Friday night, everybody got together because there was only one place or two places in the whole county where black people could go to a restaurant and eat. This continued for decades.
Yeah, I thought that was just in the South.
No. Black people could not swim at Sylvan Beach until the 50s. There was one day a year that they closed the beaches to white folks at Sylvan Beach, and that's when black folk went there to swim, one day a year. And it was a huge event. If you look at some of the archives, I have some at home, and if you look at a lot of the pictures that are in Peterborough, and other people that I've come across, they'll say to me, and we get talking about this, say, well, you know, I have these pictures of everybody in my family dressed up, and the young women have these sashes on, and I let them know those were taken in the photography studios at Sylvan Beach. Because these communities were somewhat isolated, going to Sylvan Beach on Colored Folks Day, all of the eligible young women got as best dressed as they could, and some of them actually put single or unmarried on sashes. And walked around the beach looking for husbands. I kid you not.
Was it called Colored People's Day? Or?
Yes.
I assume it wasn't Juneteenth.
No, it was Colored
It wasn't
People's Day.
celebrated then, yeah.
And so you have these, at Sylvan Beach in those days, because photography was still, you know, an up-and-coming thing, as you will, there were these professional photographer studios. They had all of the settings, and you could go in there and pose, and they would take these great pictures, and they're all over the place. Yeah.
Well, I'm surprised because when they make a movie about segregation, it's always in the South. They don't show it in the North.
Yeah, well, trust me, it was here. I can remember my mother came to Sherrill, Oneida, Greater Oneida area in 1948, and shortly thereafter, her brother came. Uncle John thought it was a bit of a dandy. He thought he was quite the ladies' man. I remember this picture of him in a pure white linen suit, and he had this big, beautiful black Buick, straight eight, and it had all the chrome on it, and he loved this car. And I remember he would let me sit, it was just chrome all inside, and the big steering wheel, all this chrome. He would let me sit between his legs and pretend to drive this car. Well, Before he passed away, he told me a story about the only time he'd ever been arrested. It was in Oneida. I was in the car, and he made a mistake and turned down a one-way street in Oneida, and they arrested him for it and put him in jail
Waiting for
for simply driving down a one-way street.
I thought you just get a ticket
That
for
was
that.
about 1958, 1959.
Were you living in Syracuse at the time
No.
of the March on Washington? Or?
No, I was living in Oneida.
Okay, I was wondering about whether Martin Luther King on that, what was it, the post-Birmingham tour, whether he came to Syracuse, because I know he did eventually, sometime.
I
I don't know.
don't
Yeah.
have any knowledge of that. For many of us, because the communications in the 60s were not like they are now. I mean, you would be glued to the TV set. I remember it as an 8, 9, 10-year-old little boy sitting on the I sat on the floor all the time. Sitting on the floor in front of the TV, which the TVs were much lower in those days. It was like a big piece of furniture that sat there, and waiting for the Walter Cronkite News to get to the point where it was going to come with the Civil Rights Movement, which they did a lot, and the whole family would just be in rapt attention, watching those things. There were some magazines that covered it too. Of course, in those days, Life and Look, which were big, popular kind of photographic magazines. But there were also black magazines like Ebony and Jet and some other magazines that tended to focus and cover those issues.
Ebony's a good magazine.
Comments, observations?
You ever heard of an exhibit called The Color of Money? It's a black artist who did paintings of the Confederate money and how slaves were depicted. It's very interesting. I was in South Carolina this winter, and he actually sells, cards, postcards. I have some I'll have to show you. It's very interesting because the closer it got to the Civil War, the happier they depicted the slaves, But it was a whole. His point is the connection between, the significance of the money to the slavery issue.
They just had something like
Yeah.
that in Rome.
It was very interesting.
There's a real, to me, there's a thread of education and knowledge that winds its way through this kind of racism, I guess. I see a lot of similarities believe it or not, between the African American experience and large groups of immigrants from any other place, particularly places in Europe. So one of my favorites is the Irish. The Irish came to America in large groups, and they were vilified and resented and thought to be, almost subhuman and lazy and all of these derogatory things. And many of the stereotypical things that I hear sometimes in conversation now about black folk and black communities were stereotyped to them, that they were lawless and immoral and all these other things. And in fact, many of their neighborhoods did have high crime, and many of the things that you see in black and Hispanic urban neighborhoods now. So was it generic to their race? No, it was a function of poverty, lack of education, and lack of opportunity. Those threads continue to wind through our urban environments today. And it is my firm belief that those behaviors that people look upon and say, oh, well, that's how they all are, or whatever, are really manifestations of poor education, lack of hope, and lack of opportunity. And they manifest themselves in behaviors which end up being survivalist behaviors.
And the foundation of the family.
Yes.
That is of great concern to me because I saw it so much in my work.
I see it every day. Babies having babies and grandmothers raising children. It's one of those things that I remember. I thought in some ways I'm pessimistic. It's one of the things I'm somewhat pessimistic about.
I share it. And all of society is based on the foundation of the family.
Yeah, I don't want. I'm very hesitant to speak it and to and to give voice to it. But one of the things that I've been disturbed by in terms of our politics is, lately it's been very vogue. It's in vogue to make these declarations. You're not a patriot, and you're not an American, you're not a good citizen unless you're willing to stand in the bully pulpit and declare that America's the greatest nation in the world.
Talk about continuity from the 1800s.
It just seems to me that you ought to be able to point to specifics
Or they'll
about
call us,
how you become the greatest nation in the world.
And it's becoming such a vogue.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, as I look around the world, there are a great number of democracies. Canada and England and France and Belgium, and they are rife. So if you look at other indices like level of education, standard of education, obesity, income, help me.
The 1% versus the 99%.
Well, a whole number of matrices about how you might evaluate the quality of your society and your culture. If you look at America on that scale today, there are very few things, very, very few things that we lead the world in. It's not educational standard, it's not income level, it's not health statistics, we don't lead in any of those things.
Powerful military. That may be it.
You know what we do lead in? We incarcerate more of our citizens than any other nation on the planet.
yeah,
We have some of the highest obesity rates. We have those things that we lead in are really rather negative. So it seems to me, and I don't think that means that we're horrible people or whatever, but it does seem to me that we need to kind of refocus what it is we are putting our efforts in, both as a people and as politicians, to address those issues in a meaningful way. Because there was a time when our performance across those areas was much higher than it is today.
well, I've been told before about how I base my opinion on, like, sometimes I get in the mood for politics or something like that, basing on my views on the rights of my own values and what I have to say. I don't like when people come up to me and say, well, just because you said that, I don't think you're loyal, or I don't think you're loyal, or you're just unpatriotic, it just puts me down. I hate that. That doesn't give me the freedom as an American to say, hey, what I have to say, it just,
Well, bullying is in vogue.
Yeah.
right.
I'll never forget, I think
don't
it
like
was
being
Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering who was quoted as saying, "You can foist great lies and incredible propaganda on any group of people if you wrap it tightly enough in the flag of patriotism."
Here's another word that I don't like to be told as. If somebody came up to me just because I had a moral right to say what I have to say and telling me I'm disenfranchised, something like that hurts the most too.
Mhm.
I'm not loyal, I'm unpatriotic, I'm disenfranchised, I don't have the right to vote just because I say I disagree with one thing another person says. That's not right in this country either. I don't understand why. It's just not right,
Well, thank you.
I wanted to say one thing.
Yes, please do.
I wrote a lot of them down, so I'll just wing it. First of all, I have to ask, does anyone know the name of that song at the end? The lyrics were something like, "I need to be free to be me." Anyone know who wrote that? Or who sang it? It's beautiful. I'll look it up later. I just thought it was so moving.
I love the music that they chose.
Yeah.
It was very powerful.
And maybe a little negative thing is I thought it was nice to see George Wallace looking as like slippery and as Ted Cruz does today. They resemble each other.
Well, he didn't make it, he
I
got
know,
shot.
But I remember when every time I see Wallace, I have a visceral impact.
Me too.
It has a visceral
It's like
impact on me.
Piggy.
And I can remember very well.
Yeah.
I was going to school. My mother always sent me to. I don't know about me, but I was never educated in the public school system. My mother wanted me to be educated in parochial schools, so that meant that I had to kind of hopscotch around various places where there was a school that met with her approval. And usually it meant some distance away. So I went to Utica. I would take the bus to Utica and back. And in second and third grade, fourth grade, I was going to a school in Stanwix, and there was a psychiatrist, a colonel or something like that, who was stationed at Griffiths Air Force Base. And I can still remember to this day that he was a George Wallace supporter. And his son, Scott, would come to school talking about how George Wallace was a good guy to vote for, and I remember being appalled. How can you support this guy?
I'm surprised about Chuck, the one that is the NRA. He was
Charlton
Palladino?
That surprised me.
I mean,
Charlton
he's
Heston.
ultra conservative.
Charlton Heston's involvement surprised me,
Then
because he
why
was,
would you think that somebody...
later he got
supports-
very conservative, ardent
Like
supporter of the NRA, and
And explain to me somebody what is contradictory about supporting gun ownership versus supporting civil rights.
So,
Good point.
I agree.
I'd like to answer, I'd like to take a shot at that. If you
Go
want
ahead,
to
take a shot, so to speak.
Yeah, my
It
respect.
doesn't contradict each other.
That's why I'm asking, why...
it doesn't, the two are
why
not,
we
the two are not
labeling
necessarily
him as,
opposed.
oh, well, he's a conservative because he supports gun ownership. How could he possibly have supported civil rights? That, to me, is
Well-
an incredible...
Your point is well taken, but it actually dropped,
Changed around their
my,
There's no change required to get to those, to reconcile those two positions.
But I wonder
I think
if
that-
he
I think there
was
is.
less conservative at that.
Let's not talk
Yeah.
about labels like
Yeah.
conservative. Let's talk about gun ownership
It's right.
versus
Violence.
civil rights. Why does one have to be opposed to civil rights to support gun ownership, which seemed to be the implication of your comment?
I think it's because of the killings in school with children, in the environment with school children, because my whole work was with school children. And I think that's what caused my bias. And I accept the fact that you've chosen to acknowledge a bias in me. That's fine.
No offense.
Yeah.
It's, the Second Amendment might be considered just as equal with the First, by many people.
Certainly the people who wrote it believed it.
And then, no, it is number two.
That's not
They're
bad, actually, yeah.
they're not in
They're not
order of
order of
priority.
But it politically, has to be, became more politically involved in California in a more Republican conservative line.
He did, but...
yeah, I was
But
speaking
it
more
became
from my,
less
Just like
liberal
Reagan,
social.
yeah.
Exactly.
That's true.
I was speaking more from my perspective of having seen some debates and some other interactions that Charlton got involved in on a host of other issues. In fact, you know, I'm a gun owner, so, I mean, it's not as if, and I've hunted most of my life, and I have guns in my house right now, so.
And my father was
you know,
an owner and a hunter, but, you know,
But, yeah,
I don't like.
I just
Anyway.
want to comment on something about the movie.
Yes,
in a
please.
very positive way, because I'm sure we've all read the speech, you know, the I Have a Dream speech, or portions of it, and we've all seen it before. But when you see it, not only is it far more powerful because of his skill as a speaker and his leadership, but it's also indicative of some of the culture. When you talk about the slave songs, when he gets to the end of the line, and you know, the line of thought, and he says, but by the content of their character, he doesn't stop, which is the way you would read it. And you say, oh, I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a world where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, period. Next sentence. But in reality, in the speech, he goes, I have a dream that
and he
not
keeps going.
but by the content of their character, I have a dream. And he repeats the I have a dream while the applause comes. And he does that each time. I mean, we didn't see the whole thing.
No.
But
I was hoping that they were going to show it uninterrupted in its entirety, because to me, that's when it's the most powerful. Anybody ever attended a Black Baptist church?
Just gonna say, that's how preachers talk, right?
exactly.
Much
That was my point.
Much of what he was doing is a cultural thing. His speaking ability had been honed within the church. There is a certain type of alliteration and a cadence and all of that, and even a crescendo and a culmination, which is utilized to great effect. Number of ministers in my family, none as eloquent as that, none as powerful a speaker as that. but you become kind of familiar with that kind of cadence and that kind of honing the ability to speak in that way. There was something I wanted to say and it's gone from me. The nerve synapses don't work like they once did.
Once at a Pentecostal church I came to, where they clap and sing, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. When they sing about the gospel, I do.
There is a Baptist church right over here.
Well, for those interested in old, for those of you interested in old music, this Saturday night at the Clinton High School Auditorium, the local chapter of the Barbershop Harmony Society will be putting on its annual show. And my quartet is
I was going to say, you sound like there might be a voice there.
might be a member of the organization, and my quartet is going to do This Little Light of Mine. That's our one little number, but you'll get to hear it if you're interested in coming.
Love a cappella 4-part harmony. In the 50s and 60s, it was something that we all did. I had 4-part groups. When I get together with my cousins, we sing those songs just as part of our family gatherings.
We're always looking for new members.
This Little Light of Mine, for example.
You sound like you have a voice too.
A little bit.
I can tell.
Anyway,
I was going to say about the NRA thing, I just want to not be combative, but which I think is a bit overkill. I don't like punches.
okay.
I like it, it's fine.
I've never done myself. Never owned a gun.
We're going to, in case some people didn't have pens, I'm going to pass around pens. I wanted to give, I just can't stop without giving giving you an invitation to some things that are going on in Peterborough. I didn't give these young folk the program, and I'll give you a little flyer. Anyone need